ROCKNAK, and welcome aboard Utopia. Utopia is an HH55 built in 2018, and it's a 2019 model year. Today we're going to do a virtual sea trial, going through the process just like you would if you actually got on the boat. And we'll start off from starting the engines and move our way forward through all the sails and put her through her paces.
Yeah. Make sure you're in neutral. You got your controls right here. You got to turn on your power. It lights up, you'll hear the beep, and then you push the start button. And there it goes, and your tachometer moves, it tells you you're running.
In flat water at 2,000 RPM running both engines, the speed was about 8.5 knots. With one engine at 2,200 RPM, we were doing about 6.4 knots. At 1,000 RPM, the boat travels about 5.5 knots.
A little over 9 knots, we're at 2,400 RPM. Seas are about 1 foot. I'm in the starboard aft cabin, and we're running around 9.5 knots or so. Seas are about 1 to 2 feet, and we're turning 2,400 RPM. There's a 57 horsepower Yanmar behind me. There's one on the other side. You notice I'm speaking in a normal tone of voice. None of the doors are rattling, none of the hatches are shaking. Everything is fairly quiet and stable.
Before we start actually sailing the boat, some things about the foredeck and also the forward sails. The staysail track is curved and is for the self-tending jib. There's a Pontos 4-speed winch, which is a downhaul for the tacks on the reacher and the staysail. The sails on the boat are a North 3DI mainsail with 3 reefs, a North staysail, a North 3DI Solent, a North reacher, and a North asymmetrical spinnaker.
On the longeron, you have the asymmetrical reacher. In this case, it's a code 0. And you also have the Solent, but that's a fixed head stay. And then the drum that's sitting down here on the side is the staysail. They are tightened with these lines going to this stopper right here. And there's a line that attaches to the winch, depending which one you're using. And you tighten the luff of the sails that way. Both of the sails attach to the top of the mast, or the fractional part of the mast, with a bullet block. And I'll show you what that is. This is the bullet block right here. We have this tied off to the shroud at the moment. This attaches to the staysail. The bullet block releases with the catch line when it's up.
Today we have the code 0 in place, a Solent, and in the bag is the staysail with its own roller furler. The other bag is a spinnaker. This is the staysail halyard. It's kept on the starboard shroud, and it's wrapped around the shroud to keep it from vibrating. The spinnaker halyard is also wrapped around the port shroud, and this one simply has a shackle.
The staysail track has stoppers, and you adjust where the staysail track sits by those. These lines release the bullet for the staysail and the reacher. The barber haulers on both sides of the boat, main sheets on both sides, so is the staysail sheet, but on the starboard side the staysail sheet is actually on the inboard clutch station. The line on the foredeck here is a barber hauler. The Solent, or overlapping jib, has an inboard track here, and that is also led aft. The path the Solent line takes, it crosses over the cabin in an X pattern in the middle before it goes to the aft stopper and winch. There are 3 roller furling lines. The spinnaker has a continuous line, that's the orange and black line here. That goes aft on the port side. There is also the Solent or overlapping jib and the staysail line, and they go back on the starboard side through their own carbon fiber fair leads. There are little strops here at the base of the mast. They are to hold halyards in place. This keeps the block from damaging the finish. This is the spinnaker release that's controlled from the cockpit. It cinches the line.
The blue line coiled here is the staysail furling line.
Jam cleat for the Solent. The top part of the sail cover comes right off. There's a zipper on the port and starboard side. You start from the end with a small string and pull it all the way aft and take this and put it down below in a locker.
When getting ready to raise the main, we lay the reef lines out on the cockpit sole so they go up in a nice orderly fashion.
Just going to unclamp the Cunningham here. That's in the well. I just want to make sure that's nice and free.
You raise the main a few inches above where it's going to sit on the hook. And on your main halyard there is a sewn-in line that shows you where that hook will engage. So you go slightly past it, and then you pull the handle that will open up the hook and allow the main to come down into it and then rest there. There are 3 reefs on the main. The first reef is actually engaged around 24.8 knots, the second reef at 33, and the third reef at 38.8. You can run a third reef if you run an inner forestay with nothing on it at 51.5 knots.
This is the stopper line. When you raise your main up, you go up a little bit higher than the mark. You pull this and it locks the main in. Then you pull down the luff of the sail with the Cunningham. That's this right here. That goes back to the cockpit. The boom has 3 hooks, 1 for each reef. The little lines, the red, green, and blue, release the hook to release the reef. The hooks here will tie into the reef, and when you want to pull out the reef, the little red line, which goes back to the cockpit, pulls like that and releases it. They're just simply attached here with Dyneema or Spectra line. You have these 2 hooks right here. The small lines, in this case the green and the red, will hook into the clew like this when you are reefing the boat. Then you release them when you want to release your reef or shake out your reef. When you're doing your reef, there's a strop there. See the red handle? That's what locks in the first reef here. That attaches to your Cunningham here. Aft are the hooks that attach into the leech of the sail near the reef. There are strops there as well. You plan this carefully and everything is all done from the cockpit.
There's a couple of ways to fold the main. One is to have someone let it down a little bit at a time so you can flake it nicely. The other way is to just let it fall and then go to the leech and then flake it aft and walk your way forward. You can do that by yourself. The boat also has a downhaul for the main, but it's rarely used. The sail pretty much comes down all but maybe the last 3 feet or so, and then you can pull that down because you can reach it. On the transom are 2 man overboard modules. They're set up that way so you don't have to be on one side of the boat if someone falls overboard. To release, you pull this, and there's a weight at the bottom that drops, and then the device falls into the water. These are 3-speed winches, and there's an indicator here. When this is down, it is in the 3-speed mode. So right now it's in 2-speed, and the way you get it into 3-speed is you have to go to the first gear, and then you can push this down, and that will allow it to be in 3 speeds. To get rid of it, you have to push the second, then the first, and that will pop up. When pulling up the dinghy, only use first gear.
The staysail track has stoppers, and you adjust where the staysail track sits by those.
The staysail is a very useful sail. It's self-tacking, and it can be attached to the drum that exists on the deck. It can be stored down below in the bag. It can be stored on the tramp. It can be used anywhere up to 24 knots with a full main, all the way up to a third reef main up to 38.8 knots. If you put one wrap around the traveler winch for your roller furling line on the Solent, you can bring it up to where your sheet is, and one person can control both.
Equal tension is being placed on the furling line so it doesn't jam. This can be done from the cockpit by looping it around the winch. The sheet is being pulled out with the electric winch, and the Solent has been released. Make a figure 8 pattern of the line, then remove it from the winch and place the line in an appropriate place.
With the true wind angle about 72 degrees, the boat is traveling about 8.8 knots and about 9.5 knots of true wind speed.
The sheet clutch is generally left open.
Under a full main, we're traveling just about 9 knots. We have about 9 knots of wind, and it's somewhere between 38 and 39 degrees apparent. We're using the B&G sail to wind feature here, set at 38 degrees apparent. We have about 9 knots true wind, and we're sailing about 9 knots, both boat speed and over the ground.
So if I change this,
Here you see draft stripes. You also see the telltales are facing aft as good draft. You can also tell by the telltales at the aft end of the sails if they're flying straight back.
Yeah, but one case.
Sailing along about 9.5 knots, about 40 degrees apparent wind. Both sails are drawing nicely. Furling the Solent is like furling any other head sail. Keep a little bit of tension on the furling line and bring the sail in using the winch. This is a North 3DI endurance sail with a sail cover for UV protection. The Solent stays in place as it's part of the head stay. It's rolled nice and tight, and both sheets will be tightened up. In this scene, there's less than 5 knots of air, but the boat is actually moving about 5 knots. In fact, the main is doing all the work. You can see that the jib is being backwinded. The concept here was to try to get some good photography with the lighthouse in the background, and the boat was able to tack back and forth under sail alone right off the shore. Switching over to the reacher, or code 0, I want to be able to show you how you can unfurl the reacher quickly. The reacher can be unfurled without having to tend the furler. You'll see that the sail can be pulled out at speed and the furler line does not move. It stays stationary, which is important for short-handed sailing. This frictionless block you see here is specific to the reacher. It's removed when you use the spinnaker. The Code 0, a reaching sail, here is 3DI, Endurance in black with draft stripes, telltales, and windows to see the other side. Just a little over 12 knots true. We're doing just under 10 knots. That'll bounce back and forth. And we're about 118 degrees off the wind true, 72 degrees apparent. In lighter air, the Code 0 can be used between 70 and 100 degrees true wind angle. And as the wind gets a little bit heavier, say 12 to 14 knots, then you're starting to play with between 90 and 120 degrees and up to 130 degrees as you get closer to 20 knots. Keeping in mind that the faster you go, the more your apparent wind moves forward. And you can easily go below 70 degrees and the sail becomes less efficient, where you should be flying the overlapping jib. Between 70 and 120 degrees, and especially if the true wind speed is increasing from 10 knots and up, it's pretty straightforward to be sailing faster than wind speed with this boat. The more off the wind you go, in winds hovering around 10 or in this case 11 knots, you'll be sailing slightly below wind speed. And if you want to be able to sail wind speed at this true wind angle, then you'll be flying your asymmetric spinnaker. In this clip, the boat is sailing at about 100 degrees true wind angle. Wind speed is just above 12 and the boat speed is just below 11. And the boat is in full cruising mode with food and outboard fuel and people and lots of gear on board. So it's sailing pretty close to VPPs at the weight that it's carrying. Another example in similar conditions, just under 9 knots of wind, just under 100 degrees true, we have just about boat speed. So here we have true wind speed of 9.1, 53 degrees apparent wind angle. We have a speed over the ground of 8.5 roughly. These two numbers are bouncing back and forth on being almost the same, and our conditions are pretty much flat. We're working with a full main, and we got a Code 0.
No, boat speed's 7, wind speed's 9.
We have the drifter up, and we're in about true wind of around 12 knots, and we're doing just about 10 at the moment, but we've been sailing wind speed on and off all morning, anywhere from 8 knots of wind to 8 knots of boat speed, 9 knots, 10 knots, and it bounces back and forth. But we can dial it in to pretty much be wind speed in this wind speed range.
And I think, you know,
Code Zero can be left in place occasionally. It doesn't have the sun protection that the Solent does, but it is designed to come down and into a bag. Now let's look what we can do between 100, 135 and 170 degrees true wind angle with the asymmetrical spinnaker.
Both sides of the boat are fairly symmetrical, but not exactly the same. Here we've got a Solent sheet, staysail halyard, and a reacher halyard, and a spinnaker halyard. There's your asymmetrical. .24. 17.18. Port forward cabin now. Again, still sailing around 8 knots and 8 knots of wind, and it's still a 2-foot swell or so out there, moving side to side a little bit. But there's really no big noise, and there's no daggerboard noise. Nothing's banging around in the trunk. Our wind speed's about 8 knots right now, 8 to 9, and our boat speed is moving between 7 and 8 knots. And you can listen quietly. You'll hear some lines stretching. You hear water off the transom, but it's a quiet boat inside. We had the music going at low volume. You could hear it throughout the boat. So now we're sailing about 7 or 8 knots and 7 or 8 knots of wind. Have the drifter. It's fairly calm seas. Maybe just a 2 or 3 foot swell at the most. And we're about 20 miles offshore, headed up north to Maine, actually. But you can hear the noise on the hull is very subtle. You can hear some water. And occasionally you can hear, I believe, a sheet stretching. Looking through the escape hatches, you can see the daggerboard there, so there is a way you can kind of see what's going on with the daggerboards by looking through these hatches. These little beanbags store in the port forward locker, and they just shove all the way up towards the bow, so they don't take up any room to speak of. But they are really quite comfortable and becoming a favorite seat aboard the boat. We're about 20 miles offshore right now, and the wind is about 12 knots. It's just starting to whitecap. The seas, though, are building up a little bit more than the wind is. To show you what's ahead, we're getting the seas off our starboard quarter. We're slightly off the wind going downwind. So this would be an opportune time for bridge deck slapping, and we're not getting that. On the HH Catamarans, the dagger boards are located on the outside. So that means down below, the passageway has a lot of room. There's a lot of deck room to walk by it. The dagger boards also come through the deck, obviously. They have a lower bearing, and they also have a trunk that they sit inside. These dagger boards have a lot of lateral forces on them, so we want to be able to have as much of that spread as possible. There's also fore and aft forces, but there's actually quite a bit of lateral forces. So that's why you have to pull these dagger boards up and down when you're tacking. Otherwise, you have too much tension on these lines. We're going downwind right now, so this dagger board is almost all the way up on the windward side. The leeward side has a dagger board partially way down. If we were headed upwind, we would have the windward board down, and we would have this up on the leeward side. Unless we were going less than 12 knots, then we would have both down, whatever level that you want, to be able to provide more lift at the lower wind speeds. The dagger board has a line driver on this boat, and that controls the dagger board's position going up and down. It actually pulls it up and down. This is controlled from the cockpit. Just from a watch position here, I can see clearly over the instruments, the engine controls, the top of the salon roof. I can see both of my dagger boards. I can see my, we have a reacher up. I can see my main, and that's just looking through the forward window. I can look through the side, of course, but there's also an overhead. I can also go up and see the head of the mast easily. This plate comes off here, and there's a hose that's attached to a hydraulic piston, and you use this portable pump, and this stores up forward. It has a pressure gauge on it, and you pump the mast up, and then you put G10 or Garolite shims underneath of it, and that's how you adjust the rig tension. The boat does not use turnbuckles. You raise the mast up. On this boat, there's a small table on the port side, and you can face aft by leaning against the glass here, and this is the right height for your elbow. The starboard settee, you could put a couple pillows in, and you could face caddy corner or face aft, and you can see that I have plenty of room here for my legs the way I'm sitting, and this is comfortable like this. We have a section of the cushion removed, so you can step up on the top of the settee itself, on the carbon fiber part of it, without having to step on a cushion, to be able to walk up to the helm. This makes a nice little pilot berth. As you saw in my 50 video, this is probably my favorite seat. This is very comfortable. I could actually see the helmsperson and see if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, and I'm looking behind and I can see everything, and it's actually quite a comfortable place to be. We're set up for 2 rods on each side, and there is the ability to tie them in right here. Starboard side rod holders also, you can tie them in. There are 2 rod holders. You can see the angle. Set up for tuna, mahi-mahi, wahoo. In the right-hand corner, you can see a full-size iPad set up, and there's a plug for it there. So if you need another special system on an iPad or second or redundant navigation system, that could sit right there. It's built in to have its own drain, and it has a shelf, and there's a cup holder behind it.
Here you can see how the line stays out of the way of the instrumentation, so you have a very clear view of everything. Some of you asked, how do I get from helm to helm? Well, here I'll take the F steps and go up to the starboard steering station, but I will come down another way and leave over the settee where the cushion's been removed, and then come right back up the other side. Just want to demonstrate how sturdy the tramp is. Some tramps, when you jump on them, you're all over the place. But watch this. It's a pretty rugged Dyneema or Spectra net we have here. At anchor, we're actually using the longer bridle. The one you see right here above the water is the one that's used for the mooring, and that just attaches here in the middle, but it goes to the same attachment points that you would use for the bridle for the anchor itself.
Yeah.
This is the chain locker here, and it can also be used to store the large inflatable fenders. They're one of the places on the boat you can do it. So they all sit in here nicely. If you want to use them and keep them available quickly, you could also put them in the forward lockers too. But there's room in here for 6 of these. There's actually 6 in here. There's 3 on the bottom. But you also have room for all your dock lines too. And there's a hose on the tank in here too. All your chain is in its own box, so it's not going to interfere with it at all. Docking the boat is pretty straightforward. If you're short-handed, you could be on the same side as the dock. If you have a helper, you can have an intercom, which tends to be very useful. Like most catamarans, it's pretty easy to use both engines to tractor in where you want, but there is a bow thruster on the starboard hull if you want to use it. When I first boarded Utopia, I was pleasantly surprised at the very high level of finish and quality of the boat. And the first time I sailed the boat, it was amazing that the speed that the boat would make under almost any point of sail in any kind of condition. The fact that it's a Morrelli and Melvin design really comes into play with this boat. The C-shaped dagger boards allow the boat to really perform well. It heads up higher than most other cats, and especially just about all the cruising cats. It's an exceptional boat all the way around, and everything's very well thought out, both by the designer and the manufacturer. During the build process, there was a strict guidance set forth on what the boat could weigh, and when the boat was finally delivered, it was weighed by an outside party, and it was within just a few kilograms of what the designer originally set. I'm Scott ROCKNAK, Utopia's central listing agent and also a worldwide HH agent. Thanks for watching.